Good morning and welcome everyone to Primetime at the BU Library. I'm Melanie from the Study Abroad office here, and I'll be giving a few announcements about the library series in general and introducing our speaker for today. Primetime at the BU Library was developed to really celebrate the experiences and accomplishments of students, faculty, and staff. Collaborative project between Friends of the BU Library, faculty development, and other offices on campus. And most presentations, including today's, are recorded and can be found online in the BU Digital Library. Upcoming events that are happening here are found on the library's news and events page and the BU calendar. The next presentation coming up will be after spring break, and that will be a Faculty Excellence Award for Scholarship. The winner was Dr. Nathan Lindquist, Assistant Professor of Physics, and he will be talking about nanotechnology at Bethel. That will be happening Wednesday, March 23rd at 4 p.m. So talking about the world of nano-sized particles, how silver can turn your skin blue, water can become thick as honey, and so forth. But today, we're going to welcome Senior Ruth Schaefer. She'll be sharing about stories and insights from her time studying abroad. This is her first semester back on campus. In the fall, she was abroad in New Zealand through the program provider HECUA, and we have a couple representatives from HECUA here today. So we had heard about Ruth's experiences and really wanted her to share to the wider community. So Ruth, we welcome you.
I'm mostly excited because I get to use one of these clickers. Hi, I'm Ruth. Thanks for that introduction, Melanie, and thank you guys for coming out. I think a lot of you have heard me gush about this, so I'm hoping to kind of streamline that gushing with this presentation. If you get bored, hopefully the pictures are just nice to look at. But yeah, this is my first semester back. I just got back from studying abroad in New Zealand, and the trip that I studied with was through HECUA. It was called New Zealand Culture and the Environment, a Shared Future. So I'm an English ed major and also English lit, but I love environmental science, I love environmental studies, and I wanted to learn more about that while I was at Bethel. And I can't add another major because 4 years just can't take that. So I decided I was going to study abroad and study environmental science while I was doing that. And after working really hard with Melanie and Vincent, I ended up finding this program. Didn't really know what I was getting into, but it ended up being the best experience of my life. So this program was through HECUA, and I think I was the first student to go abroad with HECUA. We had one who did a domestic trip earlier, I think last year or something like that. But I'm really hoping that this presentation does HECUA justice because they are an incredible organization to study with. This is their little logo and their motto, learning in action beyond the classroom. And I know that when you think of study abroad, you think, oh, I'm going to go outside the classroom, like it's going to be a hands-on experience. And I think I speak for a lot of study abroad students when I say that that's what a trip is. But HECUA, that is the heartbeat of HECUA. Like, that's all that we did was learn outside the classroom. And as a student who does well in a traditional school setting, I was excited to get outside the classroom, but I didn't really think it would be that influential, and it definitely flipped my whole view on learning. I think if you ask any of my education profs today how I am in class, if I'm different at all, I'm like 100% different, because I want to learn how we can get students in high school and elementary school also learning outside the classroom because it's such an incredible experience. So, HECUA is who I studied with. They're the Higher Education Consortium for Urban Affairs. If you have friends who want to go abroad or know other students, definitely recommend HECUA because they're great. So, HECUA is all about community-based learning, and that community starts with the staff who kind of oversaw us. And when you think of professor, you think of the person lecturing up front, but this is definitely not these professors. They were basically like family members. So I feel like I'm introducing my family to you right now when I'm talking about them. But there's 5 of them. I didn't have enough room on the slide, so there's another one. Just be prepared for that. This is Charles. He's kind of the bread and butter of the program. He runs everything. He's like the crazy professor / uncle / dictionary all at the same time. Really smart, really caring. He grew up, and his father was a social justice lawyer. So he grew up literally in the court system while they were working on land disputes between the Maori and the Crown. And Charles was the scribe for his father and stuff like that. So that instilled in him this passion to see reconciliation with the Native people and the Crown, or like European mindset people. This is Pete. Pete is awesome. Oh, just look at his smile. Okay, that's Pete. But he was a social activist / social justice lawyer, and took a lot of that experience that he had fighting for the Maori people, and kind of made it a little bit less radical when he taught it to us. But it was great to have his perspective in there. He's like a wise old sage about all things New Zealand. My favorite quote from him is that rules were made to be broken. So if that teaches you anything about how they wanted us to think in this program, that's Pete. He kind of designed the program and he's handing it off to Charles. The next one, that's Narangi. I know it's a dark picture. He hates having his picture taken. And this was on the HECUA website because I didn't even have a picture of him. We called him Na. Whenever he walked in a room, all of us college students would go, "Hey, Na." And he didn't get it, but we thought we were funny. But basically, Na was like our cultural advisor. But in that role, he was just himself, and we got to just do life with Na. Na grew up in the native bush, like the forest, with his grandmother and grandfather and their tribe, and didn't see a white person until he was 15 or 16. That's when he first went to school. And so he learned all of their prayers and their traditions, like the old language. It's morphed as time has gone on, but he learned that original Maori language. And he knows just so much about the Maori culture. If this tells you anything about Na, he told us on the last day of the trip that he was the man who taught New Zealand survivor cast how to survive in the forest. He taught Bear Grylls how to survive when he came over to New Zealand, and he also gave cultural debriefings to Lord of the Rings staff. So he's a big deal, and he's super humble. That's Na. So yeah, basically with Na, he taught us blessings before meal times, or he gets up every morning and goes to a body of water and does this prayer chant type of thing. So he welcomed us into joining him with that, and he would constantly be infusing his cultural knowledge into whatever we were doing. I know how to pick berries in the New Zealand forest and turn them into tea, which is not helpful here, but it's something that I learned. That last one on the end, that's Ash. I know it's not a super professional photo, but Ash is super whimsical and creative and innovative. He runs a bike fixer-upper shop, basically, in his hometown, because he believes that the community should be basically working together at all times. So he wants to take public spaces and turn them into communal spaces, and he wants to see people empowered in ways through giving them a bike, because you have parts sitting around. So that's Ash. He infused a lot of youth into our program. And this next one, that's me and Maya. So Maya was our marine biologist specialist / she kind of kept the whole trip running because all of them are a little crazy brained. And I chose this picture because she was my Kiwi sister by the end of this trip. And that's just a good example of how the staff become family because you're traveling together and doing life together. So that's Maya. That's in front of a mountain, if you can't tell. Okay, so what this trip looked like. So I was the only Bethel student on this trip. There was lots of students from the Midwest and different liberal arts colleges, and there was a ton from Colorado. And we all flew into Auckland, met each other for the first time. It was kind of that awkward, hi, I don't know what to do. This is us, this is the first group picture that we took, and it's funny looking back at it because we didn't know anyone. That's just weird. But basically they took us, and we flew in, and the next day we all piled into 2 vans with our 5 professors, and way too much peanut butter. Apparently we eat a lot of peanut butter here. I don't know. Everyone commented on that. And took off for a month-long field trip across the North Island of New Zealand. Okay, so basically the field trip was a giant grand zigzag down the North Island. We started up here in Auckland, which is there. We went over to Tim's and then down to Raglan, and we kind of did this type of thing, and then we ended up in Wellington down here. Here's a list of all the places that we went and visited. A lot of the times we were staying in eco lodges or at hostels. We had a few cool experiences where we stayed on a marae, which is a cultural type of ground. And we just got to see what the landscape of New Zealand was. We got to meet with indigenous people on their lands. We got to go to these farms and actually see the environmental policy playing out. And that was huge in teaching me. I know that we would just sit down at dinner after a day or a week at a place, and my friends and I would be like, what did we just learn? Like we haven't sat in a lecture for like months now because there's summer before it, but yet we were learning all of this information, and we continued to unpack it over the entire semester, because when you get to experience I guess what's actually happening in the field with individuals who are always infusing their knowledge, you end up learning a lot more than you expect. So those are some of the places we went to. I'll give you a few highlights. The Firth of Thames, that's the first place we went. We all got there and we were expecting spring, so like flowers and sunshine, but what we didn't realize is that New Zealand, Aotearoa, that's the Maori name, is known as the land of the long white cloud. And it's pretty cloudy and rainy there, especially during winter and spring. And so we got there and we were like, this is cold, what are we gonna do? But by the end of the 4 months, we came to love those cloudy days just as much or more than the warm days. So that's the Firth of Thames. We stayed in a lodge for a week off the grid, and it was really important in setting the foundation for what we were studying and also building community amongst 26 of us who did not know each other at all. Oh yeah, this was our first study session, and I swear I have this here for a reason beyond we look like caterpillars in sleeping bags. But we sat down with an article that kind of unpacked the history of New Zealand, and I think about 10 minutes into reading, we all just took down our hoods of our sleeping bags and we were like, is this the New Zealand you were expecting? And we were all like, what is actually going on? Because what we had expected when we came into New Zealand studying environmental policy in New Zealand was sheep, really beautiful mountains, those are the Misty Mountains in the Lord of the Rings, if you were wondering, and rolling hills, like the Shire, which they do have. These are all my pictures. But what we didn't realize is that New Zealand is just really great at tourism and at projecting a great image to the rest of the world. Not that it's not fantastic, but their slogan is 100% pure New Zealand. And that's definitely not the case with their environmental policies, as that article that we read kind of played out. So this is an infographic from a lecturer that we heard named Mike Joy. He does a lot of environmental research and kind of like questioning policies because of the research that he finds. And it just has some statistics that we had been learning about, or that we learned about in that article, like the fact that New Zealand has the highest proportion of threatened species in the world. 68% of its ecosystems are threatened. 90% of its low and pastoral rivers can't be swum in after it's rained, or you shouldn't swim in them after it's rained because of the amount of chemical and especially nitrogen buildup. 68 or 62% total of the rivers are unsafe to swim in because of this. And so you think that you're going to go splashing around in this clean, pure environment, and it really does have its own problems. It's kind of like the United States, but on a smaller scale. So it was a really great, kind of dynamic environment to study the environmental policy in. These are some of the issues that we tackled head on during that month. We visited a lot of different dairy farms. Dairying has actually overcome sheep farming in New Zealand, basically. And they're working at intensifying because they only have so much land. And so talking to farmers and kind of questioning them about why are you intensifying when they're getting a lot of heat from those trying to maintain solid, stable environmental policy. Another thing with the endemic species, so in New Zealand was all birds. There was 1 or 2 mammal species, and I want to say they were small bats, before rodents and other mammals were brought over by European settlers. And so they're trying, a lot of these birds that were native are dying out because the rats are getting to their nests or things like that, eating their young. And so they have these projects where they build these giant fences to keep the pests out, and there's trapping within them so that they can revitalize these bird species, essentially. So we visited a few of these eco-type sanctuaries just to see how much effort they have to put in to maintain these species and if it's really working. And then this picture on the bottom, this is actually from the South Island, but I thought it was a good example. So these beaches are really famous tourism spots. It's in the Abel Tasman area. And so you see a lot of the forest and stuff around the tourism spot, but as soon as that cuts away, we have a ton of deforestation. And that monoculture foresting type of thing is huge in New Zealand. And it's not sustainable at all. So we had a lot of interesting talks with tree farmers as well. We were also Pakeha, which is the Maori word for basically like white European. We were the Pakeha being welcomed into a Maori world. I talked about this a little bit with Na, but how he taught us as our cultural advisor. But really, I think a lot of us expected going into this trip studying environmental policy and being exposed to the indigenous culture, kind of how we are in our school system with the Native Americans. So we thought we would maybe be like an arm's length from it, just reading articles about it or maybe hearing about it. But we got completely welcomed into that experience with Na. He basically took us on as his tribe. And so we could get into different cultural centers or ancestral grounds because he was our elder and we were his tribe. So we learned songs that we would sing with him and like support him. And then he would like also welcome us into his community, which was a really special experience because I don't think a lot of New Zealanders get that. So that was cool. This is called the hangi. It's my favorite part of Maori culture because that's how they greet each other and it's also how they say goodbye. They press foreheads and noses, and in pressing foreheads you are addressing where the person comes from, so their ancestors. And then in pressing noses you also like breathe in, and so you're sharing the breath of life. And then you just say kia ora, which means thank you, or hello. And so I just thought it was a really beautiful way to acknowledge others, and that kind of sums up Maori culture in one action. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce this. I was gonna try to learn, but I don't know how. But this is a Maori proverb that kind of drove a lot of our studies. It means if the land is well and the sea is well, then the people will thrive. And so we studied a lot of the interconnectedness between the land and the people and what happens when there's exploitation of the land and how that's impacting people, especially in New Zealand. This is one of their firms that are pretty well known, just because they're so curly and the spirals go on forever. I think a few of my friends got tattoos of that actually, but I thought it was a good embodiment of the interconnectedness of everything, and we talked about that constantly. One more thing that was really important for me with studying Maori was this saying kia kaha. So kia kaha means like stand up, be confident, stand strong. But it's not just something that they toss around. Like when they say kia kaha, they mean kia kaha. So be heard, don't sit down until your voice is heard. And we learned about this maybe our first week there, and it was really important for me because I was the only Christian on this trip. And so it was a interesting environment to navigate coming from Bethel. And so I was often not afraid, but just like unsure of whether my opinion would be shot down or appreciated by people who didn't share the same perspective as me. But I always had my professors and my friends by the end saying, whether they were literally saying kia kaha, or they were just saying, you know, like stand strong in who you are, like stand strong and like don't be afraid to share who you are. And so I really appreciated how that program allowed for so many different perspectives. That was really important to me. This is from Wellington. I just thought it was a pretty picture. Okay, so a couple more highlights from the field trip. Raglan is a tiny little surf town on the west coast of northern New Zealand, and they are basically all about alternative community structures or environmental approaches. And so we got to study with two pretty cool dudes. This guy's name is Rick. He's a genius. He doesn't look like a genius maybe because he's wearing that vest and standing in front of a bunch of rubbish, but he is a genius. He and his wife basically took this awful plot of land and turned it into this thriving permaculture farm. This is their farm, this is a view from their farm. This is award-winning garlic apparently. And he also kind of spearheaded the efforts towards making a zero waste type of waste center, I guess. So they really strive to reduce the amount of waste, and it's spread to their whole communities, to reduce the amount of waste that they put in, but also involve the community in the process of dispensing of the waste that they create. So there's a thrift shop that runs out of here, they have a compost. The receptacles that collect actual waste are see-through so that there's social pressure with dumping your waste. And it's a really incredible organization because they don't have a traditional waste collection in this area. It is extreme zero waste, and that's run by the community. So I felt like I kind of jumped into a case study in a textbook when I went to this town. We also went to this eco-retreat called Soulscape. This is the front lawn of it. These are some breaks that make the surf there really famous. This guy's name is Phil, He was a surfer and accidentally became an activist because they were mining the black sands in the seabed out here. And he did not want them to mine the place where he surfed. So he got involved and kind of led this campaign against the mining companies, and then got sucked into activism from there. He runs this eco-retreat center and also does permaculture. One cool thing about it is that all of the housing on it basically is renovated boxcars and rail cars. So this is a train car that we slept in. The Natirangi Marae is where we stayed with a Maori iwi, or a tribe. And we got to stay there for 3 nights, which was really special. I included these pictures of the kiddos because basically their whole tribe was there, and we got to just interact with them throughout the whole days that we were there. And the kids became like our family members. We were a little squad. If you can't tell from our headbands, we had just finished running around in the rain with him for hours. But a super cool experience because maraes are where they come and regroup. Each tribe comes and regroups, and they acknowledge their ancestors there. And so it's just a really like sacred and special place to them, and it was a cool place to learn more about their values, and just get to know some indigenous people without studying them in a textbook. One thing about the way that Maori people introduce themselves, so I said that they acknowledge their ancestors, where they're from, but they also acknowledge like the land that they're from. So whenever they introduce themselves, they say where their ancestors are from, and then they say, this is my mountain, and this is my river or lake. So the mountain of these people was Mount Ruapehu. That's it in the background, looking all beautiful and stuff. And our whole group got to go out with some of their iwi and go on like a basically sacred journey through the foothills of this mountain. Which, I mean, you can't just like sign up as a tourist for that. So I have no idea how I ended up on this journey, but it was incredible to see and hear the different parts of the land that was special to the tribe. This is the man, Keith Brooks. He's kind of the elder for this iwi, and that was him kind of at like the peak of where we went. He's leading us in some song or something like that. And then from there, we traveled down and we eventually ended up in Wellington, which I know my face looks like super distorted in this picture because I accidentally photobombed that pano. But that's Wellington, and that's our first night in Wellington. And I was really excited to be there, obviously. Wellington is the capital city. It's been named the coolest little city in the world. And I mean, I'm biased now, but I think it is pretty cool. I don't know if you can read this, but this is right on their waterfront. Their waterfront director is all about like art and poetry. So I met him and I was like, dude, I love this. You're so cool. But it says up here, this little plaque says, it's true, you can't live here by chance. You have to do and be, not simply watch or even describe. This is the city of action, the world headquarters of the verb. And I thought that encapsulated Wellington really well. It's pretty dynamic. It's super vibrant and creative, and it's also the political hub of New Zealand. They also have a huge coffee culture, which I didn't realize, but if you know me at all, I love cold coffee. So I basically spent all my money in their coffee shops. That's my favorite coffee shop. One of the best parts of living in Wellington, so we were in Wellington, we did that first month field trip, and we were in Wellington until the end of December then. So a little more than 2-ish months. Is that we all got to go to our own host family around the suburbs of Wellington. And when I heard host families, I was originally like, wow, yay, I get to live with a family, like I'll get to babysit kids. You think like this big family. And I actually got paired with a single mother who had 2 dogs. And I was like, okay, well this will be interesting. And she was actually, it was the best experience I could have ever had. Like I don't even know why I wanted to ask for kids. That's Kiri, she was my host mom. She reminded me a lot of my actual mom, who was right here, shout out. And we got along so well. It was seriously like living with a really fun but more responsible roommate. And she loves her dogs so much that they were like my own siblings. This is Tia and that's Hale. They would jump in my bed every morning, which is why I only have pictures of them on my bed / hiding because they didn't want me to make the bed. And yeah, I mean, we look pretty dorky here, but we pretty much only dorked around all the time. She loves reading. She is part Maori and studied Maori, had Maori studies as part of her degree from university. And so it was so cool to live with her because she was and studied the same things that I was studying while I was there. She's also a vegan, so I got to eat vegan with her for 3 months, which was a blast. And it's hard to do at Bethel, if you're wondering. I figured I'd give this a shout out. So this is the cat, TC. If you can't see, she's right there. This is from my desk. And this is the only interactions I ever had with her. She would stalk me along the alley of this house. And like, she hated me. She would just hiss at me other times. But my host mom and my roommate didn't believe that she didn't like me. So I thought I would just stick this picture in there to show my relationship with the cat. Kiri lived in Newtown, which is like the youngest, hippest, most diverse suburb. And I, again, am super biased, but I think it was the best. It was really fun to live in. I lived on this street right here. And this picture was taken from the Southern Walkway. So this is one of my favorite parts about Newtown, is that it was really close to the city, which is like right over here. And also there's a green belt around all of Wellington where they have hiking trails and mountain biking trails and roads, but why wouldn't you walk? I don't know. So I could hike into the city every day if I wanted to. And I had the time to because my program was super flexible. And so I spent a lot of time just like wandering around the flowers. Which sounds ridiculous, but it was great. When I didn't go hiking because it rained sometimes, this was my bus stop. I don't know where my pointer went, right here. And then I lived really close to the center of Newtown, which was fun and full of coffee shops. I also think I single-handedly funded this taco shop that was down the block from me. Okay, so host families were a huge part, but also once we got to Wellington, we all got placed in different internships at different eco-friendly organizations, I guess. And I got placed with Sustainable Coastlines, which was like a giant blessing in disguise. Seriously, I had no clue what I was gonna get, and I thought they were gonna like haphazardly place us, but Charles takes all of our applications and like works really hard to place you at an internship that will work perfectly for you. So what Sustainable Coastlines does is, I don't know why this is a theme, but it was started by 2 surfers who didn't want their beaches to be messy. So they were like, let's go clean this up. So they started these public cleanups up in Auckland, and we're realizing that just cleaning up the beach wasn't doing anything because there was always more rubbish on the beach. I had to learn how to say rubbish because kids don't know what trash is. And so they started this educational program that goes along with it, where they went out and would educate the community, specifically like school children, and then they would take them on a cleanup after. So they educated them about single-use plastics, how a lot of single-use plastics end up going down storm drains, end up in the ocean, which affects animals, and also our food, our food chain, but especially theirs as an island country who eats a lot of fish. So I got to work with another intern from the U of M, and we worked with one man who was spearheading Sustainable Coastlines in Wellington. And he basically trained us how to do his own job, which was incredible because I know how to run a beach cleanup now if you need me. But I got to go to a bunch of different beaches, and my internship wasn't behind a desk, but like I got to basically see the entire shoreline of northern New Zealand and talk to a bunch of school kids and hang out with them all the time. And it was a blast. Definitely my favorite part of this whole program. We also did public cleanups, so this is from our public harbor cleanup right along the Wellington waterfront. And this was so cool because it involved the whole community. So we had that education station, which is like a shipping container. That was our home base. And then there was a whole group of diving teams that came together, and they went out and free dove in the harbor. And they would pull up all this rubbish from the bottom. And then we had people in kayaks and also people like snorkeling around who would bring the rubbish in, and then it would get disposed of eventually. And they found a motorbike somehow down there. So that was like the climax of that experience, I think. If you can see up here, the community was just super into it, which was cool to see, because sometimes you think that with nonprofits, like they're struggling so hard to like even get anyone to be involved, and Sustainable Coastlines had it worked out because they did all of the cleanups and stuff that all revolved around fun. So I loved that. This is me in Sydney. We were running the kayak station, and the mayor just like nonchalantly came down and jumped in the water and started diving. So if that shows you what Wellington's like, I mean, if that doesn't show you, then I don't know what will. A few other things we did with Sustainable Coastlines. We were in charge of this giant truck that moved the shipping container around, so basically everyone knew us as the girls in the vests that were obnoxious. That's us moving the education station. This is Bessie, the truck. It like basically never drives. Well, it kind of drives. I don't know, it kind of just growls. New Zealand, you drive on the left side of the road, and also that was a stick shift truck, which neither of us knew how to do, but we had to learn how to drive it for our jobs, so that was fun. Our boss was super patient, and I think he thought he was gonna die multiple times. We also collected rubbish and like audited it, and we got to work with Meridian, which is a wind energy company down there. It's like the biggest one in New Zealand. And they have this giant wind farm right outside of Wellington. And if you drive on the private land of the wind farm, you can get to all these private beaches. And so we got to work with them because they wanted to do public cleanups on their beaches. So we also got to work with a corporation, which was cool. That's the team at the final one. I was laughing, of course, but that's my boss, that's Sydney, that's Sam Judd, who kind of created Sustainable Coastlines, and the rest of this was all volunteers. So that's Sustainable Coastlines. We all had different internships, so that was a cool way to get involved with the community because my friend was in charge of the climate march. We ran around in animal suits one day advertising for it. My roommate worked in the Beehive, which is their parliament building, with a member in parliament, and so I got to go attend events there, and also we would just hang out on the parliament lawn for lunch and stuff like that. So it was a cool way to get plugged into the community that I don't think I would have got if I went to a university over there. We did have class a few times a week. We studied at a community garden, which was, there's a sculptor who had a bunch of sculptures in there. That's one of them. And it was very student-centered. So we would go do research as groups, and then we would present to the class. And so it was very tailored to our own interests, while still following the thread of culture and the environment. And finally, the last component of this program, I know it seems to go on forever, which it does, but it's just the greatest thing because it's all interconnected, was an independent study project. So we all did this big research project, and it was due like the last week we were there. We could choose our topic, and then basically we worked with Charles to do this project. And so I decided to study street art as a tool for community building and also like an activism tool, because New Zealand's street art climate is pretty cool, and it's like booming there right now. If you go to Wellington, all of the walls are painted in some way or form. And Christchurch is actually like, they're trying to make it the street art capital of the Southern Hemisphere, which is cool. This is my favorite mural. It's kind of iconic for Wellington. It's a bunch of sharks along this garage on the waterfront. And when you look at it, it's colorful and it just like adds flavor to the city, I guess. But it was also, the painters intended to make a point when they painted it. And when people like investigate into it, they always figure out about this, which is a prime example of how it's an activism tool. But they painted all those sharks because they were trying to protest the finning or the definning laws that were happening in New Zealand at the time. So I have like 200 pictures of street art in New Zealand if you want those. And finally, this was such a great experience that it was too good not to share. So when my whole program ended in December, my family ended up coming out, which was so special. My mom got to come a little bit earlier than my dad and my brother because my brother had finals. But this is me and my mom in Wellington, so she got to see like my city. Whenever I'm missing it, I can just, call her up and she knows exactly what I mean. She misses the cheese scones and the coffee just as much as I do, I think. This is my family reunited. This is like one of the first days that we were all together, and we hiked a mountain, and it was great. And you get to do things like explore new places with your family. That's me and my brother in Milford Sound. And then you share new jokes. That's my dad being a Kiwi bird, if you can tell. I think he's embarrassed, but the fact that they know the culture enough to make jokes about it with me is incredible, and it's just one of those little nuggets that I just want to hold on to forever because it makes coming back a lot easier. So that was my experience abroad. I'm ever thankful for it. I'm constantly learning from it. I was really nervous going into it because I didn't know environmental science stuff. I didn't know what HECUA was going to be like. And it was incredible beyond words. So with that, thank you for coming. Kia ora, that means thank you. Beyond. I guess I'm paraglided, but that's not actually me. I tell everyone that's me. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay. Great. Thanks.
Yeah. So you said that you feel like you've seen a change in yourself in your education. Any other noticeable changes in like how you're approaching school or your life or future work?
I guess while I was there was like one of the first times that I wasn't just doing school. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but my life didn't revolve around going to class and doing homework. And doing homework and going to class, I guess, was just an addition that it basically enriched my life instead of being something that my life was basically centered around. And I've been trying really hard to bring that back to Bethel with me because school should be an enrichment to life instead of life. Which I think I knew going into it, but I didn't actually know what it looked like until after studying with HECUA.